everybody. Welcome to another painting class. I'll be your teacher today, Cori Jaye, and today's class is going to be all about Impressionism. And more specifically, it's going to be kind of my modern take on Impressionism. So Impressionism is just that. It's when you use the paint to give an impression of the subject. So I have come up with 3 specific rules that I want you to keep in mind when we go through today's class. And I'm going to go over them first now just to start to get you thinking about it, and then we'll talk more when we get into the video. So what are these 3 things? Well, the first one is optical blending. So when you lay the colors down when you're painting in an impressionist style, you want to make sure that you're laying down color beside other strokes of color without blending them too much together. And optical blending is when the viewer, their eye blends the colors and it all kind of blends together in beautiful unison and creates the object of the image. So one is optical blending. And when we think about optical blending, we also want to think about creating strong brush strokes that aren't blended. So when you lay down your brush strokes, you want to make sure to lay down a couple strokes beside each other and not blend them out too much. We really want to see the brush detail in the strokes and also using quite a bit of paint so that you can make some strong brush strokes. So one is laying down colors so that they will optically blend, and the second is to make sure that brush strokes are visible. So that all comes in hand with optical blending. The second is capturing the light source. So in the reference photo that I've chosen, there are very strong highlights and shadows, which will make it easier for you to create a dynamic painting that has lots of depth in it. So when you're laying down colors and when you're choosing where to put your strokes down, I want you to think about the light source as well as highlights and shadows. So where are the lightest areas of this piece? Where are the darkest areas and where are the midtones? And then kind of keep that in mind when you're painting. Now the third element of Impressionist painting is relaxed and sometimes even inaccurate drawing. So by that I mean more of a freehand drawing, roughing in where your pieces are, where your subjects are, that kind of thing, as opposed to trying to make it exactly perfect and exactly to the reference photo. So, there's a couple ways that you can achieve this. One is by not being so tight with the details that you're laying down. But the second is the preliminary drawing. So with the preliminary drawing, I did use a transfer. So I traced over the line work just to get the main elements of the image over to the canvas. And I did that using a technique where I use monitors. So I'm going to show you that next. But you can also choose to forgo that and just start the project by just drawing on the elements that you see in the reference photo directly onto your canvas without using a guide. Now, if you don't use this guide to get the elements over, your piece might have a little bit more of that impressionistic vibe to it because it's going to be a little bit more organic and not so concrete. The elements won't be exactly where they were in the photo. But at the same time, if you choose to use the transfer method that I'm going to show you by using my monitors next, you'll really get a good base to just jump in and start painting. So I really like using this transfer method because when I paint, I really want to focus on the painting and not so much of my drawing. I'm very happy with my drawing skills and I don't feel like I need to work on them. So I like to just jump right into painting. So this technique will help you jump right into the painting by getting your main elements right down on the paper. But like I said, if you choose to forgo that, it really goes along the lines of Impressionism by just kind of drawing them on freehand yourself. And then we can jump into filling them in together next. So one thing before we get there, I just wanted to let you know that I love the fact if you're going to mix all your colors from primaries, that would be so great. It helps develop mixing and is really important. But one thing is that sometimes it's hard to mix a nice green because of color bias. So this painting is really strong on the greens. So I'm just saying that because you might want to add in a green, if you're only using primaries, a mixed green into your kit, just to make that a little bit easier. Now first I would go ahead and try mixing green from your blue and your yellow and see what you get, because you can really play around with, mixing the right color. But sometimes if your blue and your yellow don't love each other, what happens is the chemical properties create a color bias and it can start to get a little mucky and be a hard color to mix. So if you're using just primaries today, maybe try out mixing a green. If your green doesn't turn out that great, I would add one into your kit before starting this video. It just might make it easier for you. I'm going to be using pre-mixed colors today, so you can follow along and see what I used when we get into the video. But I just wanted to let you know that, because sometimes the chemical properties of the paint don't love each other and there's no possible way to get a non-muddy green depending on your kit. So we're all using different paint today, so it would be up to you, but just wanted to let you know that. Okay, so we're going to get into the video. I'm going to start with an explanation on how I use monitors to transfer my image to the canvas. And then after that, we'll get into the video. So stick with me. Can't wait to see what you create. To start, you want to grab a piece of tracing paper or a see-through loose leaf, whatever you have, that's the same size as your painting surface. So today I'm painting on a 9 by 12 inch piece of canvas paper. And then you want to hold it up to whatever monitor that you're using and adjust the size of the picture on your computer so that it's closer to the size of your paper and the image fits into the paper. So for me, all I'm concerned about is the size of the flower for this piece. I don't really care about the background because I'm going to change that. And then you just want to grab a piece of painter's tape. I like using this painter's tape because it's easy to take off and doesn't damage the screen. And you want to center your piece or wherever you want to have it, and then tape the piece onto your monitor. Now you want to be light with the tape and light with your hands, just light with everything when you're touching the monitor. Obviously you don't want to damage the monitor. And then you want to go through and trace it. Now, just like I said, when you're using your pencil and you're tracing it, you want to make sure that you're light-handed with it so that you don't dent your monitor. And then if you find that there's some areas that are kind of hard to see, you can just up the brightness on your screen or your program. So here I'm using Photoshop, so it's really easy for me to make it a lot brighter. And that'll make it so it's easier to see through. And then you can get those last little details that you couldn't quite see if it's not bright enough. And it's important here to turn all of the shapes into a linear drawing. You don't want to add any values to this. You just want to create an outline to fill in with the paint. Okay, so to start, you want to grab your green painter's tape and you want to tape down your canvas paper on all 4 sides. When you put the tape down, you want to make sure that you overlap just about 1/4 of an inch all the way around, and you want to do the exact same amount all the way around the border so that when you remove the tape, you have a nice even border all the way around. And when you put your tape down, you just want to run your hand over it nice and smoothly just to press it down to make sure that there are no little areas where the paint could possibly seep underneath the tape. So just make sure you do that all the way around on all 4 sides where the painter's tape meets the paper. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to grab this acrylic glazing liquid gloss. You can use any acrylic medium for this, or you can even use plain white paint if you don't have an acrylic medium. But basically what we're going to do is we're just going to take a little bit on a brush and we are going to lay it down where the painter's tape meets the paper. And this helps to ensure that when we do our painting on top and we take the tape off at the end, that we have some nice crisp edges where the tape has been laid down. So you want to put a nice thin coat all the way around the border of the piece where the tape meets the paper. And make sure that you're not laying it on too thick. You just want a nice light coat of this, And if there are any areas where there are like blobs of it or a lot of paint gathering, you just want to take your brush, wipe it off, and dry run your brush over that area to pick up the excess. So a nice even coat we're doing all the way around the piece. This step is also optional, so if you don't want to do this, that's totally fine too. It just creates for a nice border when you're done your piece. Okay, so next I'm going to take my drawing on the transfer paper and lay it down on the surface. I want to make sure that I line it up exactly how I want the piece to transfer. And then I'm going to make sure that I press down the tape just at the top. And then I'm going to grab a piece of charcoal transfer paper and lay it down in between, and make sure that you put the charcoal side down. So you want the charcoal side touching your canvas so that you can transfer your piece on. And then I grab a red pencil crayon. You can use any pencil crayon here, but I like to use red because it shows me where I have drawn and where I haven't drawn. And you just want to make sure that you go around your whole line drawing and press the drawing through onto your canvas from the transfer paper. Now you just want to do the lines. You don't want to make sure you don't add any value or anything. This is just to give yourself a guide of where you need to paint. And then you can take a look underneath, and if everything's transferred good, you can take away your tracing paper. Next, what you want to do is grab your paint. So I'm going to use a variety of different paint for this. So I'm going to use a base green color, a yellow color, a dark green color, a black, some white, and I'm also going to use some red. You just need a tiny, tiny bit of red. And then we're going to start and mix our first color. So for the most part, I'm using this green color and this yellow color to create kind of the lime color of most of the leaves, or the majority of the leaves. And then I'll also add a little bit of white to this. So that's my main mix, is the green, the yellow, and the white. Now, once you have your first color mixed, you can go ahead and start laying down the paint. So I use this drawing because I really want you guys to be able to work this piece in little sections. So we're going to start off and we're going to lay down a base coat on 3 of the leaves that we're going to start to work with. And you want to make sure that you don't blend the colors completely when you're laying them down here. You just want to basically get a base color onto the canvas that you can layer on top of. So with acrylic painting, you layer the paint one coat on top of another. Sometimes you wait for it to dry, and sometimes you blend it all together while it's still wet. But the idea is to add layers upon layers, and that's what really gives a piece dimension. So you want to lay down your first color on each of these leaves. Now you'll see that the color is not completely flat and it's not completely mixed. And that's all going to help with the optical blending we want to achieve with the impressionistic painting. So we want to be laying down colors and not blending them completely. However, for these base coats, you can just lay down almost a flat color, because we're going to be creating details on top of it that will give more of that surrealism look. And you can see for this last lily pad here out of the 3, I've mixed in a little bit of red. So when I mix a little bit of red into that color that I pre-mixed with the green, the yellow, and the white, you'll see that it starts to give it that kind of plum type of tone, a little bit more maroon. And all the lily pads in this piece are going to be a mix of these greens, and then some of them will have a little bit of red and a little bit of purple added to them too. So we just want to make sure that when we're laying down these first coats that we're tinting the color so that it's correct. Next, I'm going to go through and grab a little bit of this green and mix it into the green that I previously mixed, and start to knock in some of the shadow areas. Now, with Impressionism, you want to make sure that you're not blending the colors completely. You want to just lay down lines of the color and let optics blend them for you. So when I'm laying down this color, I'm not blending it into the green color base, I'm just leaving the flat line, the strong line of color there. And eventually the eye will create an illusion for it. And then when I do the green on this kind of plum color, I'm adding the green to mix it, the dark green, into that plum color so that it's a little bit tinted. If I were to use the same dark green color that I used on the lime lily pads, you'd be able to tell that it wasn't right because the shadow on the plum leaf is going to have a little bit of that plum color in it. So just make sure you're thinking about that as you're mixing different colors. Next, I'm going to grab this pink color and I'm going to start to do some of the highlight areas on the leaves. So first I'm going to knock in a little bit of the shadows with the green, and then I go to the highlights. And I'm just going to use this pink color. Now, the color's not actually pink on the photo reference. However, in terms of color choices for this piece, I made a choice to use this pink color instead of white or instead of a lighter color, just to give a nice visual. And I just like playing off the colors that way. So if you want to make your own color choices as you go through this piece, please feel empowered and you want to make it your own. So use whatever colors you think will work best. So here I'm just adding a little bit of details, and then I'm going to go through with this white. Now when I pulled this white on, I'm just going to add a little bit of the green in there, mix it to get like a nice light highlight color. And then I'm going to go through and do some details on this first leaf. So you can see that I'm just using the paint in light strokes and I'm not blending them. So this is where that optical blending comes in. I'm going to rely on the viewer's eye to blend these lines together once they view the piece from a little bit of a distance. So that's what the technique is. I basically just lay down color on top of that base color and not to blend it. Just leave it powerful and strong. Now also when you're doing this technique, you want to use quite a bit of paint on your brush. So every time that I lay down a couple strokes, I'm loading up my brush with paint here just to make sure that the paint flows smoothly and that I get that really crisp line that I want. And then even when the paint starts to run out a bit, you can still continue to use the brush and it creates a little bit of a dry brush technique and it'll help to fade the lines a little bit into the background color. Another thing you want to keep in mind is the type of brush you're using for what area. So when I laid down the first color, I was using a thicker brush, and now that I'm doing some detail work, my brush is a lot thinner. This is a rounded detail brush, and the other one was a bit more of a flat brush. So just keep in mind that you're using the right brush for the right area that you're doing. And even here with these shadows that I'm adding in here, I'm using a smaller brush and again loading up the paint on the brush so that it goes on nice and smooth, and that if I needed to blend any colors together or grab any colors, I could do that with the excess paint on the canvas. And it also makes for a nice strong line, which is really nice when you're doing this technique because it's really about creating bold shapes. And you really want to focus on capturing the light sources. So that's what I'm doing here with these details. I'm creating the shadows that are between the leaves and also on the end of the leaves. And another element of Impressionism is relaxed and sometimes inaccurate drawing. So that really makes this type of style very, very forgiving because you don't have to worry about everything being perfect like you would in realism, where you're trying to get something to look super, super accurate. This is more just like the name of it. You want to create an impression. So it doesn't have to be perfect, and if it's a bit more loose or fluid, that will just add to the illusion of the piece. So next I'm going to go back in with this pink color and add a little bit more details to this kind of off green plum shape here. And again, I'm using my thin brush. So again, making sure that I have the right brush. And then adding in a little bit of red to create a little bit more of the details on the lily pad here. And then just bringing the colors through and being, again, kind of loose with it. Like I'm not trying to get all these lines to look perfect. I just want to create an impression so that when someone's viewing it from afar, all the colors blend together. Okay, so next I'm going to grab a little bit of blue and a tiny bit more red. And I'm going to work on the kind of background area of the piece, which is just the little bits of water that peek through. Now in the image they look very, very dark, but it's not often that artists use black in impressionistic paintings. So I decided to change it to be blue. But then as I started to do the blue, I thought it would be nice to have a couple different colors mixed in there. So I'm going to grab some purple and mix the blue and the purple together every time I make a stroke to do the background here. So here I'm just grabbing the purple, and then you'll see that I grab a little bit of blue and I grab a little bit of purple, and I mix them together as I make these little strokes to create the background color. And again, this is a different technique than if I were to be painting this and wanting the color to be flat. You want to make sure that you can see as many brush lines as possible with this painting style. So I'm just using a tiny brush here. Using a tiny brush on these types of areas will help me get into little areas that I need to get into, but it'll also create extra brush strokes, which will add to the visuals of my piece. And next I'm going to grab a little bit of pink and finish off some of the details on these pieces here. So I'm going to go back in and just highlight some areas that need to be brought up more, some areas where the light hits. And the more you do shadows and highlights, the more impact your piece will have, and the more you'll be able to see the form of what you're drawing. So really focus on trying to capture the dark areas and the light areas of the piece. Okay, so next I've switched back over to my thicker brush here, and I'm going to go through and continue the same technique that we just started for these three. So the first thing we did was we laid down some flat colors. So I'm going to go ahead and continue to do that again as I branch out and start to knock in more of the piece. Now, when you're doing this, you want to make sure that you're capturing the general value and tone of the area that you're knocking in. So for example, some of these leaves might be light green, some might be a mid-tone green, some might have a little bit of red in them. So you want to make sure that you honor that and change the values a little bit as you work around the canvas. This is just going to help to ensure that the piece looks a little bit more realistic and also gives some more interest to the piece. If you were to just leave all the lily pads to be all the same type of green, it wouldn't be as interesting, and would also be kind of hard to differentiate where one leaf ends and where another one begins. So you want to make sure that you're mixing in little different bits of more white and little bits of red and changing up the colors as you go to match the lily pads that are there. So next I'm just going to create another one of these more maroony kind of reddish greenish tone leaves. So I'm going to go through and I mix a little bit of white in as well, and you'll see that I've switched from the green to this color. And now I'm going to go and fill in these in all the different areas that I see them. And another thing is, once you mix a color with acrylic paint, you want to make sure that you use that color in all areas of the canvas that you need it or that you can. And that's just a way to help conserve paint, but also work smarter and have the piece all in unison. So if you have this red color in one area, to move it around in a couple different areas of the piece, that'll just help the composition look appealing and more interesting. So I'm going to go ahead and do that here. And then also for this leaf that I'm filling in now, I've added a little bit more red than the ones at the top. So you can see how just adding a tiny bit of red to a color, or a tiny bit of green, or just adding a little bit of something changes the color dramatically. So when you're mixing and practicing changing your colors, just start little bits of at a time of introducing different tones, because a little bit goes quite a far way. And then I'm just going to add in a little bit of the pink actually. And that is going to give a little bit of dimension. So we have a dark one, now we have a little light one there. Okay, so next I'm going to go back to the green and I'm going to add a couple more leaves in with the green. And as you can see here, I've mixed a green tone that's a little bit darker than some of the ones that I've been using in the past. So near the top of the piece, the colors are going to be a little bit lighter than near the bottom of the piece. And that's because the lily pads get a little bit closer as we move towards the bottom of the piece and a little bit bigger. So you'll be able to see a little bit more detail as we go through. And another thing with this is if you can capture some of the form of the piece with the base tone, feel free to do that. So in some areas I might mix in a little bit of a lighter color as I'm laying down the background for just half of the piece or part of the piece. And that's going to give a little bit of dimension even just on the background layer as well. And all these things, they help when you're blending the background and the foreground. And then for this piece, I decided to mix in a bit of the shadow as I went right here because there was such a big shadow here on this leaf that instead of painting it the light green color underneath, I decided to go right to this little darker color and add that in. And then I did that for a couple of the other pieces while I had it on my brush. So again, I'm using that same technique of using what you have on your brush and moving it around the canvas where it makes sense. Next, I'm going to show you the same type of thing, but I'm going to use my tinier brush. So I've switched back to my smaller brush and I'm still using this dark green color and I'm making some shadows. So for the smaller leaves, it doesn't make sense for me to use that big brush to make these smaller leaves. It makes sense to use a smaller one. So I went back and switched. And then I'm filling in this kind of maroon leaf that I have here and then adding some pink on the end to make it pop a little bit. Then after I've done a couple of different details here, I'm going to go back to the background color, that bluey purple tone, and go and fill that in. So I'm really using the same technique all throughout this canvas where I start off doing a background color that is similar to the color of what I'm trying to achieve for the entire leaf. I lay that down on the leaf and I do a couple of leaves at a time, and then I go back and add in some highlights and shadows on the leaf. And then I go through and do some of the background color and fill in some of the background color. So you want to use this process as you work around your painting. You want to use the same process here. And it'll just help you if you don't know what to do next or you don't know where to go next. Just make sure you use this kind of rule of thumb and it'll help you get through the piece. And here again, I just want to stress that I'm creating the background color here and I'm using a tiny brush. And some areas it's going to create a lot of little brush marks, and that's really, really great. That's just going to add to the interest of our piece. So I'm just filling in the background, and you can also use this time to crisp up any lines that have gotten a little bit too loosey-goosey on you. So for example, if you painted outside the lines in one area, then you can go back in with the background color and kind of crisp it up a little bit. And paint over and bring back some of the details like I just did there with the center of that leaf. I reintroduced that with the paint because it got covered with the green. And then I'm going to add a little bit of pink here to the blue, and I'm going to add in a couple of strokes all around the background just to give, again, that optical blending illusion. So if I'm using a couple different colors, the eye is going to blend them for me, and that's really the idea with Impressionism. So next I'm going to go through and I'm using my smaller brush again here, and I'm going to mix some more of this green color. This time it's more of like a mid-tone green. I'm going to add in a little bit of the dark green here. And as you can see, I'm twirling the brush in my hand as I blend. That really helps to get the brush loaded evenly all the way around. And then I'm just going to go in and fill in a couple of these little areas that kind of get overlooked that are underneath the lily pads that we're looking at. And then add in some details. So back to this dark green color to create some shadows. And I'm going to do that in a couple different areas here too. And then I'm just taking excess paint off the side of my brush by using the side of the palette. So feel free to do that if you have too much on your brush but don't want to clean it off completely. And then just continuing to add details to these lily pads that I just painted. So some have shadows, and then here I'm adding the pink as a highlight. I just really like how the pink looks as opposed to using just white to highlight. The pink just adds a little bit of extra color, and I just think it looks really beautiful. And then using the same line technique where I'm laying down those lines and not blending them in too much. I'm going to go through and do that on a couple different pieces just to make sure that I have some nice details in there before I move on. And again, just make sure that you're using the right brush. And also, if you twirl your brush in your hand when you run out of paint, there should be more paint on the other side. So that's another technique that I do as well. Okay, so next I'm going to create a deeper plum color. And this is to create the shadows on this plum leaf. So this is important that I'm not using the same green color as I'm creating shadows on a leaf where it doesn't make sense. So dark green makes sense on a leaf that's green. Whereas if the leaf is plum, it doesn't make sense to use dark green as the shadow for that leaf because that's not what the shadow would look like. So you want to make sure that you're making choices that make sense for what you're viewing. And also, this is where using your reference photo can really help make those decisions because it'll show you what it should look like and what the deep colors look like and what color your shadow is. So you want to make sure to make the appropriate blending decision for the painting that makes sense. And then I'm going to go through with some pink here and do some highlights to this piece. So I'm still using that same pink here because it makes sense for the piece. And then making sure that I don't blend it out too much. And same thing for the details that I'm going to paint in here. I'm going to try and keep my brushwork kind of loose so that it's not super blended because that's really going to help with our illusion. And that's another way to show the relaxed and sometimes inaccurate drawing style. And by inaccurate, it just means that it is not perfect to how you would see it in real life. So the form and the shape are not exactly how you would see them. Maybe instead of a circle being perfect, it's a little bit of off circle. It's kind of like that. You just want to draw what you see, and that kind of creates a little bit of movement in the piece too. When it's not perfectly drawn or perfectly painted in, you get a nice kind of rhythm and movement to the piece that way as well. So, and then I'm just going to go back in with the pink and do similar lines that I'm doing right now, and even some stippling technique here where I'm just kind of creating some dots and some quick lines. People also use hatching and cross hatching in Impressionism. So just little bits of line work, or stippling is like little dots. So you can just add in little bits of paint where it makes sense. Like I'm adding a little bit of pink in here and a little bit of a red line here, and just using little bits of paint to express the piece and the form of what I'm trying to express. Okay, so here I'm going to go through and continue on with the same technique that we've been talking about. So I'm going to try and capture the main tone of each of these leaves as I fill it in. Again, I switched to my larger brush here. But now that the shapes are getting a little bit bigger, you can see that I can do a little bit more of color changing as I move around the shapes. So you can see that this one that I just painted here, one side is a little bit darker than the other side, and I'm doing that with the base color. So as you create larger shapes, it gives you more of an opportunity to change the base color to be more accurate to how the piece looks and leave less for the details on top. So we're still going to do lots of details on top, but we can capture some of that form, changing the colors as we go when we paint. So we're just going to continue to do that and capture a bunch of these green shapes here. Just paying attention to where this piece is lighter and where it's darker. So on this side of this leaf, it's lighter, so I'm making sure that I'm adding that in. And then also, when I'm laying down the paint, I want to capture the form of the lily pad. So there's little lines in each of the lily pads, and when I lay down the paint, I want to make sure that I am making sure that I'm laying down those lines, just like this piece here, in the way that they would be forming on the actual lily pad. So you want to use always the form of something when you're painting it in to kind of influence your brush lines and your brush strokes and how you lay the paint down. And that's exactly what I'm doing here. And then you can just see that even using this like really light green color here that I just used, and then the contrast of the mid-tone greens and the dark greens, there's really a lot of, excitement to this composition. And anytime you create variety, it creates interest. So you want to keep that in mind, just make sure that your colors are different enough that it's interesting to look at. And then I'm going to go through with this large brush still, because we're still working on these large areas, and knock in the shadow areas. And again, trying not to blend, just trying to lay down the color in the area that it makes sense. And trying to keep my movements a little bit more fluid and less static and precise. So next I'm going to switch my brush here and my color, or switch my color on my brush here and start to create more of these plum tones as I move through the piece to finish off laying down all the background colors. So I'm going to mix this plum tone here. It's just made of the red, the purple, a little bit of the white, and you can add a little bit of the pink as well. And it creates a nice strong kind of red color. And even at times I'm adding in a little bit of the green. Like right now I'm adding a little bit of the green to it too. And that just helps to kind of bring areas of the other painting, or the other areas that are painted, into what I'm painting now. So you always want to try and vary your colors and use little bits of all the colors of the painting all around it to make it look unified. So next, on this larger area, I'm going to, instead of laying down one flat color and going on top of it, because this shape had a lot of unique colors in it, I'm going to try and capture them with my brush. So I'm not going to lay down the purple all the way across and then do details on top like I did in the other areas. I'm going to try and capture the form of this by using some kind of stronger brush strokes with my brush loaded up, and then see how I can capture it. So one side is a little bit darker than the other, so I lay down the darker side first, and then I'm going to grab a little bit of the pink here and mix it into the colors that I've been working with. And I'm going to use this for the other side. And that already is going to give the illusion of this piece being a little bit folded. So the light will always help show you the form of the work. And so if you're always kind of confused, or if you're feeling kind of not sure about where to lay down the color or what's light and what's dark, look at the light, the highlights and the shadows, and how the light interacts with the piece. So here you can see that one half of the piece is illuminated and another half is more in shadow. And so that's really going to create form to this little piece that we're making, this plum lily pad. And then I'm going to go through and create a bit of a darker shape in the middle. And that is going to give the illusion of the water or the way that the water is showing the light as well. Because there's a little bit of water in this piece kind of hanging out, so we're going to try and capture that as well. And then also you can see that there's lots of brush strokes that you can still see. So I want to make sure that I'm doing that as I'm working throughout these pieces, because that's really what makes it look more impressionistic. It's just giving the impression of where the color is going, and not completely blending each color out. Then I'm going to add a little bit of red in the center to reflect the reference photo. And then I'm going to go back with this lighter pink color again and mix in a little bit. And I'm going to try and move my brush to make the strokes that make sense for how this piece would actually look. So I'm following the details of the piece with my brush lines. And then again, I have some left over on my brush, so I'm going to bring it down to another area where it makes sense. Okay, so next I'm just going to go through and add some details in the piece now. So here I'm going to use the stippling technique where I just draw on little dots, and then I'm going to add in a little bit of reddy green and create that center point in a lot of these pieces, and then bring my brush out and create some details that are going to give the illusion of the lily pads being bumpy. And you can always start with one color and then switch to another color and continue to build up the same spot. So here I started with like the reddy green color, and now I'm switching to more of a pinky red color and just continuing to add it just to the center areas. So you want to make sure that you're changing the colors up when it makes sense and using little bits of color to convey your message. And next I'll go back and do the background area. So mixing that blue and purple together here with little strokes and like little quick lines to help aid in the background. And you could always do one color background, like you don't have to do the pink and the blue together on your piece, but I do think it adds a little bit of extra excitement and a nice look to the background here. And again, being mindful not to completely blend out the colors together and just leave the lines. And then I'm going to go in with some pink and really add in some highlights on this piece. So this is where I feel like the piece starts to really sing. This is my favorite part, is adding in the final details and really bringing up some of the colors. So I'm using pink as a highlight on some of these pieces that are still quite flat. And you can see that it really helps to create a strong tone and dimension in it. And using the pink just is visually, I think, very pleasing and beautiful, and not necessarily, it's not super accurate to the reference photo, but this is one of those times where you want to make decisions that express what you want to express, and this is how you use the paint to express yourself, and why everybody's pieces are always different, because everybody's going to be making different choices in this type of situation. And then I'm going to go through with a little bit of white as well and highlight just a couple areas with the whitest of white. So I always leave the white to the end because it's the highest highlight, so to speak. It's the lightest highlight. So I just go through and add in a little bit of white to different areas that I feel like it makes sense, and that I want to accentuate and kind of bring forward, that I want the light to hit more. And then I'm going to switch to my thin brush here, and there's some areas in the shadows that I want to deepen a little bit more. So not all the shadows are the same color. Some are a little bit darker. And so here's your chance in the piece to go through and deepen up little areas of shadow that need to be a bit darker, or lighten areas that need to be a little bit lighter. This is when you go through and you do that work in the piece. So I love the darkness that this color is adding. It's just creating such a nice color punch. And so you want to go through and adding these details in your piece. And you also want to look for areas where you forgot to add a detail. So you can see right here, I forgot to add a shadow underneath this piece here. So I'm going to just go through and add that in, and just make sure that you're checking out your reference photo for those areas where you may have forgot. And adding in those shadows before you complete your piece.
And last but not least, I'm going to go through with some more of the highlight color again and try and bump out this piece here. It still wasn't quite light enough on the left hand side here, so I'm going to go through and layer in another layer on top. And that's kind of the beauty of acrylic paint, is being able to layer colors on top. So if there's an area that you don't like, or you're not that into, just make sure that you wait for it to dry and you can always paint over. You can see I messed up a little dot outside here, but again, I can just cover it up with the dark color right on top there. And yeah, just capture any little details that you may have missed. All right, so that's it for this painting. I really hope that you guys enjoyed and learned some techniques and tips about painting Impressionism. I want to make sure that you guys sign the bottom and make sure to date it, because it's always nice to go back and see, some of your earlier works and what year you did them, and then compare them to how far you come as you continue along in your journey. And then here you can see we have some nice crisp edges. That's from the initial technique of laying down that matte medium there, or the gloss medium that we used. So it just really helps to create a nice fine edge here. And this is honestly one of the most satisfying parts of the piece, is pulling off the tape at the end and seeing the final work. And yeah, I think that the colors blended really nice together. When you go close up to the piece, you can see all those different brush strokes and all the little details. But when you're viewing it a little bit further away, it all kind of blends together. And that's kind of what you want with Impressionism. So yeah, thanks so much.
Okay guys, that's it for today's video. I hope that you guys learned a lot in this one and really enjoyed trying out the Impressionism style. And I can't wait to see what you create. So feel free, as always, to tag me on Instagram or send me an image, and I can't wait to see your paintings. Have a good rest of your day, and we'll see you next time. Bye.